Hi there, this is Grant Snitker, and this is video tutorial number 3 for using CharTool. So we're going to pick up where we left off in video tutorial 2 by continuing on and showing you exactly how to quantify charcoal fragments in CharTool. So where we left off, we have essentially this pop-up here that shows us all the key commands for using CharTool. I'll go ahead and go through these when we kind of get into the quantification a little bit later, but essentially, this is just a little pop-up that reminds you of all the ways that you can essentially access these different measurements and different tools in CharTool. So we'll go ahead and click OK, and we'll get to it. So the way that CharTool functions is that it uses sort of these localized thresholds in order to differentiate what is charcoal versus what is sort of background material based on color. So as you can see here, in this experimental set of charcoal, this fragment here is much darker than the background color. So essentially, what we are able to do is click on it and use a local threshold to put a selection box around that individual piece of charcoal. So I'll go ahead and click, and you can see that it highlights it and allows us to select it. And by doing this, we can actually collect multiple measurements on that individual piece of charcoal. Things like the circularity, the aspect ratio, rectangularity, edge roughness, all sorts of different attributes that we wouldn't necessarily be able to do by just sort of measuring sort of the length and width of that particular piece of charcoal. But as you can see, it's a little pixelated. It doesn't do a great job of capturing it. It does an okay job. So one of the first things that we do in CharTool, once you get set up, click on your first piece of charcoal, and then you want to adjust your local threshold. So to do that, we go ahead and click Z, and that brings up the wand tool adjustable metrics here. So we're always going to be using an 8 connected mode, and I like to smooth it when it's thresholded, just to sort of give us, again, sort of the real shape of that piece of charcoal. But then we can go ahead and adjust the tolerance for that particular piece, and basically set the tolerance for all of the charcoal we're going to be quantifying under these conditions. And so right now it's set at this default value of about 30, but you can kind of go up or down to capture much of the variation of that piece of charcoal. So it looks like 50 is probably a really good threshold for us to use under these lighting conditions and with these particular pieces of charcoal. So go ahead and click OK. And it looks like that does a good job. We'll test it on some other pieces. Yeah, it seems like it's outlining those pretty well, and we can capture, exactly what we need to capture with these pieces of charcoal. Well, sometimes it takes a little bit to get these smaller ones. There we go. So now that we are able to select a piece of charcoal, the next thing that we need to do is actually measure it. So the easiest way to do that is actually just to right-click and click Measure Fragment, and that will bring up, usually it'll just measure it, but for the first piece that you measure in every session, it'll bring up this metadata dialog. So here, this is where you can enter all the information that you need for this particular sample. So your sample number, your depth range, if you have it, you can enter whatever information you need there, the date, who's doing the analysis, and any other important information. So you can go ahead and I'm not going to enter these. We'll just let those values stay as their defaults, and I'll press OK, and that will pop up our results. And so you can see for that individual piece of charcoal, we've got all of these measurements, and the metadata is appended right to the end of that. So we have that sample, our depth, our date, analysis, and other information. So as I go through and highlight different pieces of charcoal, that will just go ahead and populate my results table right there. And again, I can move around. I can select all the charcoal I want to select to quantify here. And again, it's pretty simple. We're just going around and measuring our charcoal fragments. So if we do get to a situation where, let's pretend I'm just not able to, well, that's a good one. Let's see. Let's say I just can't get a good selection around a piece of charcoal. What I can do is actually switch to a manual mode. So I press X, which is one of the key commands, and then I can just manually draw the selection box around that piece of charcoal. Go ahead and measure that fragment, and it does exactly the same procedure, updating the results here in my results table. To switch back to the automated sort of thresholding functionality, just go ahead and click C, and that'll get us back to that magic wand, and then we can start, again, measuring all the fragments that we need to. So one little tip for this, if you have a fragment that you're not able to really fully get a good selection around, you might try clicking in multiple places around the fragment. You can see that the local thresholding changes ever so slightly when we click in different portions of the charcoal fragment. So here's a good example. So basically just you want to click around until you get the best selection that you can for that piece, and then at that point you can see, again, sometimes it's a little, you just got to click it, and then you can measure that fragment, and that way you'll get your best available selection. Some of the other important keystrokes would be the key D, that deletes your last measurement. So you can see here we've got 11 measurements. I hit D, and that deletes the last one. So that can be really useful if you do accidentally measure. Let's say you click outside of a fragment and you hit measure accidentally, and it measures the entire view field. You can just hit D, and it'll go ahead and delete that measurement. The other functionality, go ahead and just look at that pop-up when you get CharTool set up. If you want to see that again, actually hit H, and that'll bring it right up. And so you can see all of the different things that you can do, all the different keystrokes. So again, these are the ones I've gone through here, using the magic wand, the freehand trace tool, and setting that edge finding threshold. You can reset your metadata by pressing A. You can open a charcoal morphotype flowchart using S. That pops up a JPEG of some common morphotype categories. You can delete the last measurement. An important one is if you are doing a petri dish and no charcoal is found, you can go ahead and hit N, and what that will do is it will populate your results with zeros just for one measurement. That's pretty important for when we take these results and put them into R. That way we can keep track of the fact that this petri dish was actually analyzed but has no measurements. Finally, you can press W to reset the scale if you need to, and then H is what I press, again, like I said, to see these instructions. Go ahead and click OK to get out of that. So as you go through and quantify all your charcoal fragments, you might notice that I have these red lines on the actually on a little support that I have my petri dish in. These are actually quite useful for creating quadrants that you can quantify charcoal in. I use red as sort of the line here because if I do have a piece of charcoal that's on top of it, it doesn't impact the thresholding. If this were a black line, it'd be really hard to differentiate that piece of charcoal from that line. So that's why I use red. I'll go ahead and put a link up on my website that sort of shows a schematic of how I create these different quadrants. Often I'll have different lanes that you can sort of move down through with a line on either side, so you can quantify charcoal down and up and down and up, moving through sort of the 4 quadrants that I divide this petri dish up into. I'll put a link to that on the website so you can see exactly what I'm talking about there. But when you finish quantifying a petri dish, what you do to save your results, it's pretty simple. You just go ahead and click the X there. It'll prompt you to save your measurements. So I have 10 measurements here. You'll go ahead and click Save. It'll open a dialog for you. You can go ahead and specify exactly where you want to save that. You can specify the name. I have it being saved as a CSV, which again is useful for doing later analyses in R to combine all of these measurements for each fragment in each petri dish to essentially do some big data analyses of all these individual charcoal fragments. So that's essentially it. That's all you need to know in order to quantify charcoal using CharTool. Hope this was helpful, and if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me via email, and I'll try to get back to you with whatever help I can to facilitate you using this tool. So thanks so much, and let me know if you have any questions.